So first of all, a big thank you for coming here to listen to me on a Sunday afternoon, when my mother would be in church. I apologize for using PowerPoint, but I think it can be helpful for people whose first language is not English. I am talking not about screenwriting, but about storytelling, because for me the most important quality for all screenwriters is to know how to tell stories, or to have a feel for it. And I'm doing this from the point of view not of the director, not of the writer, but from the point of view of a film producer. Part of it is serious, part of it is a more light-hearted approach to storytelling, and I am doing it with the help of the great storytellers, mostly in the English language. So I have not used Tolstoy or Dostoevsky or any of the great Russian storytellers. I was hoping to be able to do that, but I didn't have time to do the research. So I will begin, and I do it in this framework of the English alphabet, A to Z. The first thing I always say to my students is that knowledge is knowing that a tomato is a fruit, but wisdom is knowing not to put a tomato in a fruit salad. A really is for audience. And by audience I mean when you tell stories, you do not have to tell stories that are successful for everyone. What you have to know is who your audience is. I say to my students, if you are making a film and telling a story for your grandmother, then the most important thing is that your grandmother understands it and gets from your story what you wanted her to get from it. I use this picture sent to me from someone in India. You can see that Colgate here are advertising to the wrong audience, because this old lady has no teeth. We have a famous author, Anthony Burgess, who wrote the novel Clockwork Orange, and he knew his audience brilliantly. He said the ideal reader of his novels is a lapsed Catholic, a failed musician, short-sighted, colourblind, auditorily biased, who has read the books I have read. He should also be about my age. In other words, his audience was himself. But we have another great teacher, a Scottish teacher, called Alexander MacKendrick. He was also a great director during the 1950s. He wrote great British comedies like Whiskey Galore. And he said the most important thing is to regard your audience as the enemy. Your audience always has somewhere better to go, something better to do than listening to your story or watching your film. And so you have to keep them. You have to keep your audience with your story. And I think anyone, I'm always surprised by how many of my writing students cannot tell a joke. But a joke really is the simplest form of storytelling. It has a beginning, a middle, and a payoff line. And the ability to be able to tell a story in a bar, in a pub, is the beginning of storytelling for me. Storytelling is also kind of acting in your head. When you tell a story in your head, you have the characters, you are acting them out, and so on. And what we find with filmmaking writers is so often, instead of solving the problems of their story, what they are doing is thinking about where they're going to shoot it, who's going to act it, who's going to be the camera, and so on, instead of really working hard to make sure that their story works. And the other thing that is really important, I think, for all storytellers is that they're ambitious, that they aim high. I always use this picture to try and get my students to never be satisfied. The great writers that I have had the good fortune to work with on films, and directors, they are never happy with their own scripts. The bad writers, they're always happy. The script is always good, cannot be changed, is the best it can be. But the really good directors and director-writers and writers that I work with, they tell me the problems as a producer of their scripts before I tell them. They know that they have not solved the problems of their story, that they have not made the characters the way they should be. As for acts, there's a lot of screenwriter gurus in America especially, but everywhere, who charge a lot of money to young writers to tell them how to write scripts. But actually you can get for free from people like the great American playwright and scriptwriter Ben Hecht, a very simple kind of, this is Hollywood filmmaking, and he'd say, you know, you have 3 acts. First act is that you get your characters up the tree, and once you've got them up the tree, then you throw stones at them. And when you've thrown stones at them, then your job is to get them down the tree. This is the simple formula of Hollywood screenwriting and storytelling. We're not going to concentrate on that. We're going to look at a wider version. And also people say, you know, this is Philip Larkin, he's a great British poet, and he said all his poems, but I think it is also true with stories that they have a beginning, then they are a muddle, and then they will have an end. That you do not have to explain in the middle of the story all the different things that are happening, because you are going to explain them when you get to the end. And of course there's the great Godard thing, a beginning, a middle and end, but not necessarily in that order. Quentin Tarantino of course has brought back that form of storytelling where stories begin in the middle, go back to the beginning, and then come to the end and come in very different things. B is for blood. You know, I think all stories must have blood in them. I don't mean by blood that they are that they have to have horror, that they have to have guns, that they have to have all these kind of things. Tom Stoppard, who's one of our great British playwrights and also has written some fantastic films, but is most famous as a playwright, puts it very well in this thing. I can do blood and love without the rhetoric. I can do blood and rhetoric without the love. I can do all 3, concurrent or consecutive. But I cannot do you love and rhetoric without the blood. Blood is compulsory. They are all blood, you see. And there's a different way of putting it. By blood I mean here conflict, emotion, things happening. You know, there's the famous famous statement from Raymond Chandler, you know, who said when he got stuck, when in doubt, have someone come in the door with a gun. And what he meant by that was not literally have someone come into the door with a gun when you are stuck in the middle of where your story is going to go or how to take it to the place you want it to go to. But what he meant was something must happen. So many scripts as a producer I read, nothing happens. And people get bored when nothing happens. Things need to happen. They can be emotional things happening. They can be, you know, action things happening. They can be very small things happening. They can be many different things. I always use this picture. I show my students just to let them know that's what we call happening. And if that were part of a script, we would never expect the horse to put his head in the car. C is for character. You know, all great stories revolve around interesting characters. And Mark Twain, who is one of the great American storytellers of his age, indeed of any age, Huckleberry Finn and other great novels, wrote an essay once called The 21 Rules of Literary Composition. And these were really the 20, I can't remember, it's 21, 26 rules. But these were, he wrote it as a critique of a novel written by Fenimore Cooper. Fenimore Cooper wrote a famous book called The Last of the Mohicans, but this was a different novel, and Mark Twain thought it was the biggest piece of shit he'd ever read. And he wrote these rules to demonstrate how this novel broke all the rules of storytelling. My favorite ones are these. These are just, there are 26 of them. They require that the author shall make the reader feel a deep interest in the personages, we would call them characters today, of his tale, and in their fate, i.e. what happens to them. And that he shall make the reader love the good people in the tale and hate the bad ones. He's not quite right there, because we have in storytelling what we call anti-heroes, essentially really bad people, but we kind of love them because they're so gregarious, so fun, so different, so much larger than life. But this is my favorite one. They require that the characters in a tale shall be alive, except in the case of corpses, dead people, and that always the reader shall be able to tell the difference between the corpses and the characters. And this is so common in stories that I read, given to me by students, that many of the characters are just there to perform a function in the story. They are not alive, they are not real, they're not people we can believe in, and then that undermines the whole story. And of course, they require that the personages in a tale, both dead and alive, shall exhibit a sufficient excuse for being there, which is very much, in a way, what I just said, that each character in a story must do more, must not only provide a function to your story, but also must be made to come alive, that we can really believe in. C is for collaboration. I'm a bit of a maverick in the UK, because I do not believe that cinema should be a collaborative exercise. You know, we have this word collaborator in English, and in my parents' day, what they used to do with collaborators is shoot them. And I found this great quote from Cesare Zavattini, who was one of the great storytellers of the Italian New Wave of the 1960s. Cinema is a collaboration where everyone tries to destroy everyone else's work. And I think I use the word engagement. And since this is a to Z of storytelling, I will come to engagement under the letter E. So I'll speak about that in a minute. D is for development. It's a big tradition, as you probably know, in the West, to develop stories, to spend a lot of time, to spend years developing your story. Jean Moreau said that if chairs in Europe were made in the same way that scripts were developed, then the whole of Europe would be sitting on the floor. But there is also a thing called overdevelopment, which is when, for me, development of a story is a very slow climb up a hill. And you get to the top when your story is fully developed, it's absolutely right, and if you continue to develop it after that, after you get to the top of it, it falls off the end of the hill and starts to lose all of the spirit and soul and excitement and interest and novelty of the story you started out to tell at the beginning of the journey that any storyteller goes on. D is also for development, personal development. You know, I say with our students, they go through 3 phases of development. They go through the phase, and I see it also with filmmakers that I've worked with, they go through the first phase, which is imitation. They want to tell a story or make a film which is similar to the films that their heroes in cinema made. And of course, this is good, it's necessary, you learn from the masters. The second phase is autobiography. So having taken on board what the heroes of my students and indeed other young filmmakers that I've worked with, they then delve into their own lives. And I'm very skeptical, because I say to my students, you know, you are delving into your own life to find a story, but as far as I can see, your own lives are really boring. And it's really hard to make an exciting story about boring things. And I think there's a big mistake made in the teaching of script writing and storytelling and filmmaking, where people say, you know, it's got to be about something that you know about. It's got to be something you've experienced. It's got to be your own voice. Well, for me, it does have to be your own voice, but the story doesn't have to be your own story. The great storytellers, certainly in the English language, I mean, Shakespeare never wrote an original story ever. Pretty much every story he did, he took Hamlet, that was a story from Denmark. You know, he took the various king and queen stories from the Middle Ages. They were all there in reality. He looked at the Roman emperors and did Caesar and Antony and Cleopatra. These are stories that were there. He took other people's stories and then made them with his own voice. And I'm always trying to encourage both the professional writers and filmmakers that I work with and the students at my school to look outside of themselves and find really interesting stories from around them and then bring their own voice to those stories to make them their own. And the third stage, of course, is originality. You take what you have learned from the first two phases of development and then you come up, and you'll notice I have done originality with a small o, because there are not so many people that are true originals. And it's much better in some ways to admit that and just bring your original voice and your original way of telling stories and your particular point of view and situation in life to the stories that you're going to tell. And then you're ready, you know, you've grown up as an artist and you're ready to leave the house. Geniuses, of course, they skip all those stages and just go straight to the thing, and we love them. And we think they're brilliant, and they have a very different kind of struggle, but not the kind of struggle that most writers will have. D is for drama. This is Frank Capra, the great American director of the 40s and 50s. And, you know, and I again say to students, I thought the drama was when the actors cried. But I've discovered that drama is when the audience cries. And to me, this is like very important. You see so much ineffective melodrama, both within people's stories, on television and in cinema, where the actors are crying, but no one in the audience is. And comedians know this most of all, of course. I remember producing a film called Backbeat about the Beatles in Hamburg, and there was a little scene in it which I really loved, when the fifth Beatle, Stuart Sutcliffe, is courting this very avant-garde German girl. It's set in the early 60s, and he says to his German girlfriend, he says, "Look, my father has told you, my father from Liverpool has told me that you Germans have no sense of humour." So she thought for a moment, and she said, "But we bombed Liverpool." Now I found that very funny. But when we are looking at the film, and we have an audience like this, a little friendly audience, that we are trying to see if the film is working and the story is working, and I made an agreement with the director and my partner, Stephen Woolley, too, that who did not want this scene in the film. And they said, "Look, Nick, if everybody laughs at it when we play the film, we'll keep it in. But if they don't laugh, then we'll throw it out." So we play the film. You know, I'm in there watching it, everybody laughs, I go to the director and I say, "Can we keep the scene in? Look, everybody laughed." And he went, "No, Nick, not everybody laughed, only you laughed." So it's a mistake that... so E is for engagement. You know, for me, engagement is a much better word than collaboration. Engagement, I say to my students that when you're working with people, you need to engage with them. You need to engage with their minds, with their hearts, and with their souls. Engagement is an act. You have to go to someone and make an effort to engage them and get them to engage with you. You know, I say it's like, as a boy, as a guy, you know, it's, of course, it's a memory from many, many decades ago, but, you know, when I would be in a bar and try to chat up, you know, a good-looking young lady, well, I still try and do that, but it's not so successful these days, you know, you want to engage them. You don't kind of go, "Oh, Nick, blah, 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 blah." You try to get them interested in you, and you try to be interested in them. So it's a very important thing, and I want them to be engaged in many things. I want them to engage with their stories. Of course, I want them to engage with their audience. I want them to engage with society, and I'll come back to that. I want them to engage with the industry that we work with. I want them to engage in culture. I want them to engage in all the exciting things that are happening in the world that can then inform their stories. This is another thing from Stevena Sodербурга, the American director. He has these 3 types of filmmakers, and I love this kind of breakdown. He says the filmmakers that don't know what they're doing, and then there are filmmakers that do know what they're doing, but we don't like what they're doing. And then there are those that know what they're doing, and we like what they're doing, even when we don't understand what they're doing. And that's for people who are applying to my school. This final type is the kind of student we want, that they know what they're doing, we like what they're doing, but we don't always understand what they're doing. F is for fear of failure. So many people are held back as storytellers, and indeed in other parts of life, by that fear of failing. And it's so important for people to overcome that fear of failure, to be willing to try something out and then be harshly criticized by their friends, by their teachers, by their producers, by the people they are working with, or indeed just their family. Because if you're not willing to do that, you will always be timorous, you won't be courageous, you won't be taking that step to tell us things we either haven't heard before or that we have heard before, but you're telling us in a new and fresh way. I always use this example. I don't know if you have IKEA, the furniture store here. Well, you'll know if you've ever tried to put up a set of shelves from IKEA. You do the whole thing, and then you find you've got them the wrong way around, and you have to dismantle it all again and then start all over again. But I always use this example of but that's like a story, you see. There are so many little bits and parts of a story that have to be put together. And even a trained engineer having to put all that together, and then when you turn the ignition on, the engine starts, and the car drives forward, and the brakes work, and the accelerator works, and so on. And it's very much the same with storytelling. And when it doesn't work, you have to dismantle it all again, like the shells, and start again. And you must never be afraid to do this. And when they don't work, you have to admit to yourself they don't work. Now, with a car, it's easy. G is for good. Again, I don't really know what a good story is. I don't like the word good or a good screen script. I don't like this word good. Good for me is like love. Everybody talks about it, but no one knows what it means. And for me, I like to use this. And I'm talking obviously English words, so I don't know what the Russian equivalents are, but I like to use the word effective. That for me, a story must be effective. If the story is meant to make you cry, I want to see people cry. If the story is meant to make people laugh, I want to see people laugh. If the story is meant to be what we call a character piece, then I want to have interesting characters that draw me in and involve me. This is me talking as a producer. If the story is meant to frighten me, I want to be frightened. And so often, and the majority of young writers work in drama. Drama is kind of the easiest thing. It's much harder to write a comedy for me than it is to do a drama. And they all do a drama, but they're not dramatic. And this is just so sad. That you come in and they say, "I've got a story, Nick, it's a great drama," and you read it, and there's no drama in it. And so it's really important to get that. And of course, good. And just talking about scripts, this is we had Stevena Sodербурга to my school in the UK, and he he was saying to me that in the days of the generation before Istvan Szabo made his films mainly in the 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and indeed right up to today. Most of the Hungarian filmmakers would come here to Moscow, to the Geek, which of course is the oldest film school in the world. I have discovered an interesting thing about film schools. I didn't realize it, but all the first film schools were founded either by communists or fascists. And of course that makes sense, because there were these new societies that they were trying to invent, and of course they wanted to use the latest technology, which in those days of course was film. So they started schools in order that people could make them, and of course there was Eisenstein here, who was just a genius in himself. But this Hungarian story is nice. It's about this Hungarian director who had gone to learn directing at the Geek, and he would take a bus ride every day to the Geek in Moscow, and he set himself the task of learning 50 Russian words on the bus trip. He was clearly a genius, because I'm still on my third Russian word. But he was trying to learn 50 a day, and then he saw there was a father with his very, young baby kind of son going on the same bus every day, and he saw that the little baby was learning Russian words far faster than he was. And what he realized from this was that this baby was learning these Russian words much faster because he was desperate to communicate with his father. Whereas, of course, this Hungarian director was just learning these Russian words in order to listen to lessons at the Russian school. So this thing of this desire, this very fundamental desire of all stories to communicate with other people, is what drives their manic obsession to master the craft of storytelling, and after that to master the craft of writing down those stories. And the people who don't have that desperate communication to communicate with other people, I feel, will probably never quite make it to where they want to get to, because they only want to communicate with themselves. And, that's interesting for them, but it's not interesting to anyone else in the world. I is for the imagination. Sorry. This is, I've used a little piece of Shakespeare here. I think that you cannot tell stories unless you have an imagination. I think this is one of the nicest and shortest ways. This is, and as the imagination bodies forth, the form of things unknown, the poet's pen turns them into shapes and gives to airy nothing a local habitation and a name. And I think this is a beautiful way, at least in the English language, of saying how important imagination is in turning something that is just in your mind into something that's real. And that real can be a story in a pub. It can be a fully blown script for a huge film. But it's nice to see that Shakespeare himself did not regard himself as an original. He said, "So all my best is dressing old words new, spending again what is already spent." So he didn't regard himself as an original. He just regarded himself as a storyteller. Now this is, of course, in the visual language, eyes are important to camera angles, because clearly where you put the camera will affect the message that you tell. I always show this picture to demonstrate that. I'm sorry, I'm a football fan. We're very lucky because we have Arshavin in our team at Arsenal. I was watching him just yesterday as we beat Tottenham Hotspur. I'm a big football fan, so you'll find football references. But what I say to storytellers, and indeed to screenwriters, is you shouldn't put direction, if you are not the director yourself, you should not put screen directions, camera directions into your script. That's the job of the director. And I remember someone asking me, "Well, Nick, I've got this scene where this boy in my story, walks off into the sunset, and I need to show that the camera comes around." I said, "No, you just need to write, boy walks off into the sunset." And then when the director gets involved, or indeed if that writer is a writer-director, when he gets to film it, then he will work out where the camera needs to go in order to suit that scene and indeed the picture as a whole. J is for juvenile, an old Latin writer from Roman times, and I put this in because it's really interesting with storytelling and with writing stories how long the same issues have been discussed. We discuss the same issues today they were discussing 2,000 years ago. I'm not an expert on even older societies, but I suspect if you went back that far. So I've just used a few of the storytellers. This is my favorite one. Many suffer from the incurable disease of writing, and it has become chronic in their sick minds. We have a lot of people in England who suffer from this chronic disease, and it's quite clear that one would be very surprised, you know, if they ever make it as real storytellers. But you go back to the Bible, it's foolish to make a long prologue and to be short in the story itself. I mean, how many scripts do I read as a producer where we spend the first, 60 pages sort of setting up the world in which the character's going to take place, and then the real story really starts 30 minutes at the end of the film. And we really want to get into the story at the beginning. We do want to set that world up, but we don't want to spend the whole film setting the world up. But this is, I think, a nice thing, which I do remind those students who do want to write about themselves and their own lives. You know, you will have written exceptionally well if by skillful arrangement of your words you've made the ordinary seem original. But it's a very special skill, that. And when people are looking at the ordinary lives, to be able to write them so that they are original, are fresh, are interesting to people going, is a very, I think, rare skill and craft, and it's brilliant when people do that. K is for kinetic, for cinema. You know, they always say a picture is worth 1,000 words. I always use this picture to demonstrate it. I use this because we have a big recession on in the UK, and I think we're one of the few countries still in a recession, and we can see that Her Majesty, as Queen of England, is following suit. L is for life. I'm going all the way back here to Chaucer. He was probably the first of the great English storytellers. He wrote in the 14th, 13th century, in the Middle Ages, and I loved his thing that life, you know, is so short, but the craft, here he meant the craft of writing, is so long to learn. And indeed, the people, the young filmmakers that I've worked with throughout my life, and the students that come to my school, they are really only at the beginning, and the most successful of them will not stop learning till they die. And that is so important for storytellers, that you are always bringing in fresh influences, fresh situations, and fresh things to your stories right until you stop. I always use this picture as a demonstration of just how long it does take. This is also a writer waiting for his profits. This is a nice thing. This is back to Alexander McKendrick, who, as I said, was not only a great teacher, but a great storyteller and a great director. And he said that most stories, you know, fit the old fairy tale model. And, you know, once upon a time, there lived a who, but. So one day it happened that. So then, as a result of which, but meanwhile, so that unbeknownst to, until the time came to, when suddenly, to the surprise of, so it turned out that. And that is, and forever after. And that's the story. You know, that model can be put on Cinderella, on Hamlet, on Bicycle Thieves, and indeed many, many of the other stories we watch in the cinema. And so it's a lovely structure to sort of, if you're telling a story, to just see how you fit it and how you don't. Ennis, the National Film and Television School. I'm the director of the British National Film and Television School. So it's whenever I talk to anyone about anything, I have to just tell you what a brilliant school it is, how fantastic, how it's the best school in the world. And so I do a long list of our values here, many of which I will refer to in this. I'll just probably draw a couple of things that are maybe special. So one of the things there that hard work, you know, I always say success is 80% hard work, 10% luck, 10% talent. Students, they don't like that. They like to think it's 80% talent, 20% luck, and has nothing to do with hard work. You know, but it's very important to us. It's very easy at our school because we are right on the edge of London. We are in this really rich town of rich people. There's probably some Russians living there for all I know. And I promise you, once they walk through the gates of our film, there is nothing for them to do in this little town, which is full of bankers, other than work. Because there are no distractions of people of their age in that town. There are some distractions for people of my age. There's some very fit ex-wives of city bonus bankers wandering around. But the more importantly, you know, we value all screen sizes. What I say, and I've always believed this, is we're looking for storytellers first. The story decides the medium, not vice versa. I'm very suspicious of people who say, I want to be a cinema director. You know, I want to be a television producer. I want to be an internet writer, because for me, I want people who have a story to tell and they don't really care where it gets told, because their passion is to tell that story. And of course, some stories should be told in the cinema. Other stories, we have really cool television in the UK, should be told on British television. Other stories, you know, will be on the net. But this thing is, the story comes first. That determines what the medium is going to be, and that, I think, makes us different from a lot of things around the world. But I won't spend too long on that because time is passing. But the other thing that we believe in is that is the importance of being able to make mistakes. You probably won't realise that that school is spelt wrong there. I'm not going to say they are Polish boat builders, road builders, but it's very important at a school people can make mistakes, because once you are out of the school, you don't have that chance to make mistakes, because when you make mistakes, you get fired. And so it's a great environment, but it's actually the thing that students are most fearful about, because they have to make mistakes with their own competing colleagues, people of their own age, their own group, and it's a really hard thing for them to do. I was coming back to this thing of originators. You know, this thing is, are you a synthesist or originator? And most of us, if we're honest with ourselves, we're synthesists. We do what I'm doing in this lecture, which is taking things from everywhere and binding them together in a way that I would bind them together, which might be different to the way other people in this room would bind them together. And I think that an originator usually doesn't have the time or the need for traditional instruction. And I didn't go to university. I left school at 16 years old. I have not had a formal education, which is, although I am a fan of the Arsenal football team, there was a very famous manager of the Liverpool football team, who were also a great football team, although fortunately they lost on yesterday. But you know, Bill Shankly, and he said, I didn't have an education, so I had to use my brains. And what I say to my students is, you have had an education, you've had one of the best educations in the world, but you've still got to use your effing brains. Because without using your brains, you can't make any use of all the things that you've practiced and crafted in your time. And, you know, this is Stivena Sodербурg's gang, synthesizers who labor under the delusion that they are originators are very unhappy. He knows this from his own experience. And I think we're in here, yeah. Producers. Now, I could talk for hours on this, but I won't. You know, quite a lot of producers, this doesn't include me, I've never written, but a lot of my friend producers are failed writers. But I have to say in their defense, so are most writers. You know, and then there's this question that everybody asks, you know, what do producers do? This is asked, there was a great book about the producers from around the world, and each one was asked at the beginning of the book to describe what producing was, and they all said something different. There was like 18 different descriptions of what a producer does. My favorite, two favorite ones are one, Christine Vachon, who's one of the great independent producers in America of independent American films, not Hollywood American films. She said, what do producers don't do? And that's kind of like this one. This is my favorite description of producers, but you're not going to see it because it's such a sensitive machine. But I love this. Producers are craftsmen, ghosts, bullies, psychiatrists, sparring partners, experts, enablers, ignoramuses, translators, goalies, friends, firemen, wimps, ditch, coaches, bomb throwers, muses, diggers, mind readers, and spittoons, sometimes all while working on the same scene. In other words, producers are really the producer's job when dealing especially with storytellers and filmmaking is to fill in the parts that are weak and leave the strong parts of your team to do their thing because they know how to do it. They don't need a producer's guidance, and they will do it best if they are given a space, if they're given their field to be in. And we then, as producers, concentrate on the parts that we know are going to be problematical, either on the production or in other aspects. This is just a sort of fun thing, is how us producers choose our stories. I'll just list a few of these. There's what we call the opportunistic cheap story. It's really cheap. Nick, I've got this film, it's going to cost 10,000 euro. We can make it, this is a story, we producers, of course, love those. There's what I call the girlfriend story. Now, this is not a story about girlfriends. This is a story this is when girlfriends of mine have bought me stories that have turned into very successful films. And, you know, these are ex-girlfriends, actually. Well, they've got an S on the end, so one of them's got to be ex, I suppose. But, you know, but I use it with my students and people around me on the basis it's not the fact that two of my ex-girlfriends bought me two stories that did become successful films. It's kind of an old thing of don't fall out with people unless you have with. Don't make enemies. As a producer, it's really important that we try and stay friends with everybody, including our ex-wives, including our ex-girlfriends, because you never know where great stories are going to come to. Old people's stories, well, I've been making a lot of films because I discovered late on in my producing career, I think I was what I call into my 40s in terms of films made and produced. In other words, I've made 40 plus pictures, and I suddenly realized that my mum, who's 89, didn't like any of them. So I had to start, I said before she kind of, you know, goes to heaven, she's a good Catholic. We call her a Rottweiler Catholic, us brothers. And I better make some films that she'll like. So I've made films for old people, Ladies in Lavender, Calendar Girls, Last Orders, all with older actors and things that appeal to older people. These are just some of the others. I'm only going to pick, you know, director's story. Well, of course, most of the filmmakers in Europe, they are director's stories. But I'm only going to pick out a couple here. One is the performance story. When you're telling stories, and especially in our film world, you know, so many people go to the theatre or go to see a film because of a great performance. So if you have a character or set of characters that an actor, that they will attract a heavyweight actor. I don't mean star, but I mean a great actor who will do something special with it. You know, that's interesting to us producers. We can sell tickets. Plus we know it will have an outstanding film. You know, for us, when we did a film called Mona Lisa in the early 80s, Bob Hoskins was nominated for an Oscar for it. He won Best Prize in Cannes. Part of the appeal of Neil's story was this great character at the centre of it, who was an unusual character that we hadn't seen in cinema before. The Zeitgeist story is like Crying Game. You know, the story of the film Crying Game, which I made in the early 90s, was basically boy meets girl who turns out to be a boy. But they don't discover that until they get into bed together. So, but what happened in America was because of the whole gay liberation, if you like, there was a fear in American society, and I think that that's why it was so successful. And there's the passion story. P is for passion. I'm a football fan, so I rate all passion by, we have a philosophy as football fans. The most passionate football fan is the one that goes to every away game. Next step down, and home game, of course. Next step down are people like me who just go to the home games. Next step down are people who watch it on television, and so on. But to me, what that demonstrates is passion is about doing. I am always skeptical when people say to me, Nick, I am passionate about film. For me, the people who are passionate about film are the people who go and see special films, people who come, well, not to see me, but come to events like this, people who do things to learn more, to find out about the interesting filmmaking that's going on around the world. It's about doing, not talking. I think this is quite nice. As your career goes on, you learn more and more about what goes wrong, but you never learn about what goes right, which is really frustrating, but it's good to know at the beginning. P is for pitching. This is a little statement made by the late Anthony Minghella, British director. Pitching is, I don't like this word pitching, but the Americans use it, which is where you tell someone about your film in 3 minutes, in 5 minutes, in 10 minutes. And I always say it's like someone's being sick all over you, with their film. I prefer the word talking about your film. That you should think you're in a bar again. Sorry to use this. You might think I'm obsessed with young women. But, when you're in a bar and you're trying to get someone interested in you, you don't go like this. You try, as I say, to engage them and get them interested. And it's the same, I think, when you're setting films up, and whether you're talking to Hollywood, whether you're talking to government who give funds, whether you're talking to other producers. Pitching is selling, pitching is dating, pitching is talking, as I said. 3 things writers do badly. And pitching is like conducting an autopsy before anyone has died. Because, you're just pitching an idea to someone. You're just talking to them about the idea of your film or about a script. You haven't actually made it yet. And yet people are telling you it's not going to succeed for one reason or another. And it's just a reminder, of course, that for some people film is art, for others it's an industry. Q is for quality. This is another thing about storytelling, is the great storytellers can have different characters who act on different moral precepts and for different reasons and with different rationales, but they all have their own logic. And the poorer writers, every character tends to act according to the same, the writer's moral precepts, but of course interesting stories are about conflict and people who have very different views of the world and very different reasons for acting in the way they do. R is for research. I can't tell you how badly researched scripts that I am given to read as a producer. And the problem with bad research is that if someone describes, I don't know, a street, a police station, a village, and you happen to know, and it's all wrong, that undermines the whole story, the whole truthfulness and interest of the story. So for me, research is really important. I learned this the hard way because I made a film called Absolute Beginners. It starred David Bowie and the pop artist, and it had 2 young lead actors in it. And the film is set in 1959 and in London, and the 2 young actors walk over this bridge. And I had what we call a royal premiere in London. It was Princess Anne, the daughter of the Queen, was the guest. And she turned round to me, because we were watching the film together during this royal premiere, and she says, Nick, that bridge was not there in 1959. I said, yeah, it was. We wouldn't make a mistake like that. We absolutely would never do anything like that. She said, Nick, don't argue with me. So I thought she meant like royalty to peasant. And I said, no, it was definitely there. It was definitely there in 1959. I said, Nick, don't argue with me. I know because I opened it. So that's and this is another thing that tutors at film schools throughout the world teach their young filmmakers. Show, don't tell. Biggest load of crap ever. I am very much out of step with this way of teaching filmmaking. For me, it's show and tell, and the way that you mix those 2 things will give you your style as a storyteller, as a filmmaker. Some will be all visual, very little dialogue, minimal. We all love those films. Others will be dialogue heavy, funny, and have a very different way of coming at their particular story. But it's the way you mix them. It's not show, don't tell. It's show and tell, and then decide what you're going to show, what you're going to tell, and how you're going to mix those things. I love this. This is from David Hare, who is one of our great playwrights in the UK. He said, of all the specious screenwriting rules peddled by gurus fleecing the young, this is the most annoying. And this is the example that I give to try and demonstrate it. I don't know if you can read it from back there, but it's a picture during the time when New Orleans was flooded. So the news item was Bush, one of the worst disasters to hit the US. But, you know, if you just showed the picture of Bush and you didn't tell the thing below, it wouldn't be the same. S is for short. You know, this is just this thing where people overwrite their stories. You know, the story gets too complicated. We're all getting alienated from it. You know, she did that, he did this, they did that, someone did something else, da, da, da. And this thing to overcomplicate stories. So I just took quotes from some of the great writers about making it short, because, you know, of which the most important one is the Frenchman Blaise Pascal, who said, you know, it was actually about a letter. I've made this letter longer only because I've not had time to make it shorter. So you write a scene and then you've got to bring it back to its shortest possible, least dialogue, least complicated form, and that's probably going to be its best form. Not always, but sometimes. You know, but I like I try to leave out the parts that other people will skip. Well, in the modern age, of course, one tries to leave out the parts that other people will fast forward. This is T is for treatment. Now, a treatment is a 1-page, 2-page, sometimes 10 or 20 pages, but a short version of your script, of your story, of, you know, what it is you're going to tell. And they are really, really hard to write. And indeed, there are some writers that should never write a treatment, because it's not a craft that they have, but they can still write a brilliant story and still write a brilliant script and still make a brilliant film. But they are demanded in the Western world. People say, send me a treatment. And you have to kind of boil your story down to a page. It's a good exercise, because you do find out what is the core of your story and what is really important about the characters that people know. But the best, Toma Stopparda, a very famous English playwright, who, and about Hamlet, and this is his synopsis of the Hamlet story, which Shekspire, of course, popularized. To sum up, your father whom you love dies. You are his heir. You come back to find that hardly is his corpse cold before his younger brother popped onto his throne and between his sheets, thereby offending both legal and natural practice. Now, why exactly are you behaving in this extraordinary manner? And I think that is the greatest, synopsis, treatment of a famous story that I have come across. U is for understanding societies. This is a lighter part of my lecture. You know, I always say with storytellers, you have to understand the society within which you're telling a story. And you know, if I've got time, I'll tell you an Irish one where it's really important to understand Irish society in order for it to be the story it is. But I'll just take you through. I've got this little what I call 2-cow description of different societies, which I like people to use as a guard. You know, in socialism, I got it off the net, of course. In socialism, you have 2 cows and you give one to your neighbour. In communism, you have 2 cows, the government takes both but gives you some milk. In fascism, you have 2 cows, the government takes both and sells you some milk. In Nazism, you have 2 cows, the government takes both, shoots you and the cows. In bureaucracy, you have 2 cows, the government takes both cows, shoots one, milks the other, and throws the milk away. In America, you have 2 cows, you sell one, you force the other to produce the milk of 4 cows, and later you hire a consultant to analyse why the cow dropped dead. You know, in Japan, you have 2 cows, you redesign them so they're 1/10 the size of an ordinary cow, produce 20 times the milk, and then you create a clever cow cartoon image called Cowcomon and market it worldwide. In Germany, you have 2 cows, you re-engineer them so that they live for 100 years, eat once a month, and milk themselves. In France, you've got 2 cows, but you go on strike because you want 3. In Italy, you've got 2 cows, but you've got no idea where they are. In Britain, of course, you've got 2 cows, and they're both mad. And then in Europe, just to bring it back more to in Europe, and I'm talking here the wider Europe, you know, we have many talented cow filmmakers, we have many talented calf filmmakers, young filmmakers. We have a very nice farmer, you know, which is called government, that supports our cows and calves in their filmmaking endeavours. And but there are a lot of cows competing with us from all the fields around, not to mention the buffaloes who come in and eat the grass. Now, the point of this is that I say this to a lot of people, that when it comes to storytelling, when it comes to cinema, the threat to the European countries, including the UK, I always have to remind people in the UK that we are in Europe. It's the sort of thing you have to tell them all the time. That actually the competition for a European film is not so much from Hollywood. That's already there, that's industrialized, they have their share of the market, they do the particular kind of storytelling they do. But it's from European film has survived through its creativity. And that creativity is under threat. And it's certainly not under threat from Hollywood. It's under threat from the great filmmakers that are now making films in Korea, in Japan, in China, in Mexico, in South America. Those are the real threats to a European film, not Hollywood. Because the European film survives because of its creativity, it's supported by various governments because of its creativity, and as a result of that, we have to make sure that we are competitive creatively with the great filmmakers that are now coming from far-flung places in the world. V is for the value of silence. I think I'm coming up to the end here, aren't I? Yeah, so I'm going to skip that since it's about silence. But of course silence is as important. What you don't say, of course, in storytelling, what you don't tell is just as important as what you do. W is for wit and humour. That goes, comedy is simply a funny way of being serious. Although I do love this. Write to amuse, what appalling suggestion. I write to make people anxious and miserable and to worsen their indigestion. But you can tell she's a funny lady. X is a chaos. This is a picture that I show my students, especially because, you know, when you're going out into the world, you are often in the position, you know, where you're in deep shit. And the best way, and you don't know what's going on around you, and you don't really understand how the industry works, or this works, or that works. So I always say, when you're in deep shit, show nothing and try to look like you know what you're doing. Takes a bit of time to spot it. Y is for young. You know, I always say young at heart. And Y is also for young. This is like, you know, I always say, inside many old people, there's a young person screaming, "What the fuck happened?" And I always say, when you're young, you must make sure that doesn't happen to you. That's why I have people at my school, that's why we make films, that's why I try to make the companies that I've been part of, whether it's Virgin, whether it's Palace Scala, to be exciting and interesting places so people do get to do the things they want to do with their lives, and when they get to that age, there won't be a young person screaming, "What the fuck happened?" And this is a serious piece from Buñuel. This is my favourite piece about storytelling in cinema. Whoops. You know, sensitive. You know, I'll read this out for you, but you know, this same glass, and he's talking here obviously about cinema, contemplated by a different being can be 1,000 different things, because each one charges what he sees with affectivity. No one sees things as they are, but as his desires and state of soul make him see. I fight for cinema, which will show you this kind of glass. Because this cinema will give me an integral vision of reality, will broaden my knowledge of things and people, will open to me the marvellous world of the unknown. All of that which I can find neither in the newspaper nor in the street. Now that doesn't mean that the stories from the street shouldn't be part of cinema. That doesn't mean that stories from newspapers, like Mona Lisa was a story from a newspaper, shouldn't be in cinema. What it means is that when you take them into cinema, they have to tell you more than the newspaper could tell you, or that when you hear the story in the pub can tell you. Otherwise, there is no point making them for cinema. That's really what he's saying. And I'll finish here with a thing which I think the art of storytelling, like the art of love, runs all the way from a kind of routine hard to distinguish or to tell the difference from piling bricks, bricklaying, to a kind of frenzy closely related to delirium. So with that, I will say a big thank you for coming here this afternoon, and I'm open for questions. No, I think that novels are just a long-winded way of telling a story. But the great novels, of course, they are not long-winded. You know, in War and Peace or Brothers Karamazov or Anna Karenina, you are turning, if you are interested, you are turning the pages all the time. And what makes you turn the page is that storytelling craft. In the same way that, you know, if you tell this joke and you get it, you know, wrong, even in a joke, you suddenly realize when you are telling a long joke in a pub that people are beginning to talk amongst themselves, order drinks, as you tell your story. And no, storytelling, novels are one form of telling stories, and a great form, and I love them myself.
Excuse me, and for example, Ulysses of Joyce, is it a piece of storytelling?
Well, there you've asked, you know, the critical question, because I think the jury is out on that, as we say. I think there will always be an argument as to whether Ulysses, I mean, what Ulysses seems to me is to be lots of different stories thrown together in a very anarchic way to annoy us. But if you read it, of course, it's a fantastic challenge, and it is, you know, probably the most irritating book ever written, but it's amazing when you get to the end. You know, if you get to the end.
Just yesterday I was discussing some kind of problem with one of my friends, that we feel the lack of simple stories in cinemas, just simple stories about the people who are living near me. And what's your opinion? Is it necessary to find something particular and to make a film about something particular, or to make films about ordinary things, ordinary people?
Well, I think I sort of addressed it, so I'll extend what you're saying, because it's a discussion that has gone on. There was a novelist called Walter Scott. He wrote in the 19th century kind of novels that are equivalent to action movies now. They're all adventures and so on. And he said he was writing about the British novelist Jane Austen. And he said, I can do the big wow wow. He said, that for me is easy, but I can never turn the ordinary into something wonderful like Jane Austen does. And that's why I was saying earlier on, I think that skill is a magnificent skill. And, you know, Ken Loach has it, many fine filmmakers have it. And of course, if you succeed in doing it, even just with an entertaining film like Full Monty, of course, then it can also be incredibly successful, because I think someone was pitching me a story in a village. Well, I say there are millions and billions of people live in villages, so most villages have the same, whichever country they're in, have the same kind of tensions and difficulties and so on, even whatever society they're in. But it's shown in different ways. And, you know, saw a lovely film set in a small community when I was at the Russian Film Festival about a simple guy who liked, just at the time when Stalin was dying, and he's what we would call someone with learning difficulties today. In those days they would call him a simpleton, but he liked to go out every day, put on a uniform and direct the traffic in the village. And all the community would let him do this. But then of course the outsiders came in, and it becomes a problem. But it's a small story, and we can all understand this story, because in every village there's normally people who are slower than other people. But no less good human beings and no less interesting. So for me, absolutely, it's not one against the other. For me, it's not one is better than the other. You know, give me a great action movie or a Bond, you know, I'm fine. Give me a beautiful story like this one was, and there are many others, or a funny story like the Full Monty, then absolutely. Cinema should not be, there is a sort of critics, of course, have to do this, but I think for most of us, it's a big mistake to just like one kind of cinema, when cinema offers such a variety, from big to small, from accurate to dreamlike, from intellectual to practical, from human beings in ordinary circumstances, you know, to rich Machiavellian czars operating, or kings invading Genghis Khan, etc. And if cinema, you know, for some people is only that, I say to them, you know, you're just missing lots of wonderful things because you want your cinema to be this one way, which is fine for your own films, but it seems to me people are missing out, you know, not to mention pornography.
I see. Thank you very much.
Please give you advice how to build a strong, bright, and interesting character.
As a producer, I don't write. What I do is pay lots of money to other people to do that. And when you do it brilliantly, I can hopefully see that you have done it brilliantly. But you know, so in a way, but I don't want to step out of the problem. My experience is that are the obvious things, but to concentrate. I mean, it depends which circumstance. Let's say it's in a little village and it's a observation of ordinary life which you are making really interesting and fresh for us. Then you want to obviously have a character there. I think always need to be a little larger than life, but at the same time we all believe in them. To have a character who does not behave in the same way as us, as you, as me, as other people in this room. So they're unusual. Maybe a character who, I do think the most interesting characters, you know, are always a mixture of good and bad, or good and evil, and it's unpredictable which is going to be, but when they are one or the other, we understand the logic of how they got to be that way. And obviously, you know, cinema is about extremity, whereas, say, television is not. So it's good to have extreme characters. When characters are bad, they should be really bad. You know, when characters are good, they should be kind of really good. So, because the cinema is in a way about, you can show on the screen things you can't show on the television. So you can have, they should have some extreme things. They should have, you know, things about them that we all recognize but haven't seen for ourselves. But that's very general, because at the end of the day, I totally depend on fantastic writers to come up and write these extraordinary characters that then, you know, make it eventually into one or other of my films. Thank you. I get all my stuff.